ocean, and the ocean takes them back. And eventually one day they might come back again to the land.
Whoa, I have not looked in the mirror yet today. Morning everyone. It is Sunday morning and as you can see I'm not in my own home. I'm at my mum and dad's house in the north. We are here because we're getting married in 3 months. I just can't believe how close it is. So we've got my dress fitting this week and we've got some food tasting. My shoes have arrived and I need to choose which ones I'm going to wear. Health-wise, it is a little bit of a gamble. It has been since the start. Like, we took a gamble in planning a fairly normal person wedding, not like a sick person wedding, on the knowledge that adrenaline can carry me through quite a lot. And while that's not something with Emmy that you want to rely on very often at all, I also do try and live a little bit by the principle that, like, if there are things that you just really want to do and it's like a once in a lifetime thing, like, the rules kind of go out the window. You just do whatever you can to get through that day. And obviously for me, I know that I generally understand the way that my illness works for myself well enough to know that, like, the risk is worth it. It's a huge privilege to be able to risk overdoing it, because, you know, that does require some level of a baseline that is like can snap back easily, and, you know, you need to be able to do it in the first place. So a lot of people are just bedbound and, like, that's not even a thought they can entertain, you know, let alone actually plan. So I've been making lots of progress in small ways in kind of how confident I feel managing my illness, which helps, even if, like, my capacity is still limited. Confidence in managing it is kind of half the battle sometimes, I think. So anyway, it's Sunday, so everyone's kind of out doing their own thing this morning, and I am having breakfast in bed, which my fiance brought me. Cup of tea, smoothie made by my mother. She makes a smoothie for every family member in the house every day. I have my current nausea breakfast hyperfixation. If you're Dutch, this will make sense. Maybe even like continental European. Like, if you're English, it probably won't. Rice cakes with cheese on. Yeah, that's even Dutch cheese. Rice cakes for me are a huge nausea solving snack, because they're just so incredibly bland. Yeah, and I'm just catching up on my YouTube videos. Been reading some really good books, which I'll talk about at some point. Finished Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I really enjoyed my reading experience of it. I wouldn't say that it's like that I loved the book. There are some things that really irked me about the characters, but I wrote loads of notes about the book, and, like, there was lots that was really in terms of how she was writing and, like, choices that the author is making. So I'll chat a little bit more about that. Yeah, for now, it's Sunday and I am going to watch my little videos in bed with my little rice cakes. I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are. Hello. I realised that I've barely spoken at all in this vlog. I did a little bit at my mum and dad's, but I was meant to do more talking, but I just haven't, and I'm not really sure why. I think I've not really been on my own that much, and I still don't really like vlogging when Ben's in the house because he can hear me and he doesn't care. He's not actually listening to anything that I'm saying, and even if he was, it's not a big deal, but I just still get quite nervous. So he's at the office today, which is why I'm filming this. I'm gonna have to get over that, because if there's months where he's not in the office, I just won't speak to the camera. So I'm gonna have to work on that. I thought I'd just catch up a little bit, because the last time we spoke I was at my mum and dad's and we were doing loads of wedding stuff. Yeah, it was really good and really productive, and I'm really pleased, but I was very, very, very tired when we got back. It was quite an exertion. So yeah, but that's okay. That I knew that going into it, and I've been resting lots since we got back. I just feel like I'm in a much better place of like understanding what I need to sort of get through big exertions when it comes to my fatigue, and kind of understand what I need to do to support myself in the best way. Not to say that I don't crash or like I don't feel fatigue, but just feel a little bit more like on top of it all. But yeah, spring has really sprung in London. It probably is going to go back to being grey and cold for a bit anyway, it always will, but the last few days have just been so beautiful, and after like what was a pretty grey, cold, dark month in February, this is like so welcome. So I've been outside loads and it's been just absolutely lovely, but when it's so nice and sunny, because my garden is such a little sun trap, like I was sat in the sun with like no jumper on, I had like bare arms bare arms, can you believe it? I wasn't cold because it just like gets so warm. So if you're sat in there in the sun, it just feels like you're on holiday, and it feels like the summer, and there's just no way that you want to come inside. It's like colder inside than it is outside in the sun. So I just don't want to do anything else, and feel an immense amount of completely irrational guilt for any time that I'm not outside in the sun. I think I just feel like whenever I'm in the sun, I'm kind of storing up my sun points, hoarding all of these sun points for the inevitable days where it goes away and I have to survive, even though that's like definitely not how it works. But I just feel like I cannot be wasting any time indoors when the sun is out, which is obviously like great if you've got absolutely nothing to do, but I do have things to be getting on with, and like also my body physically does have to work a bit hard when it's in the sun and when I'm warm, and it does aggravate my POTS. So it's always a bit of a conundrum up here when it's so sunny. I just have to remind myself that we have the whole rest of the summer. Spring hasn't even really started yet. We're technically still in winter, like we're very much in the early transition phase, and there is so much more time left to be outside. It will be fine. I'm not gonna get penalised for any time not spent outside. I just, for some reason, can't really understand that in my brain. So I'm sure lots of other people feel that. But I have been outside for most of this weekend and have given myself permission to also not be so productive if I would rather be in the sun. It has been so lovely seeing things bloom in my garden. It's kind of, I can't almost believe that I planted everything in the autumn and it's just all been laying dormant there, kind of getting ready, storing up all its nutrients and getting ready to bloom. And like the garden is so green and now a bit more colourful now that the daffs are out and the crocuses, and I planted some dwarf irises for the first time. They, first of all, are a lot shorter, so they don't need as much support. I find that in my garden, because everything's in pots and things aren't growing in really big bushes or like bunches. If there's taller plants that lack support, they do kind of get broken off in the wind and stuff. So I'm really loving that they're a bit smaller, so they're a bit fuller, and then they bloom earlier as well, which is really nice because usually irises don't bloom till like May time. So it's really lovely being out there, and like it's really at a point now where like daily things are changing, things are popping up and dying, and like new things are growing, and it's wonderful. Brings me so much joy. Before I just quickly run you through what I've been reading in February. I've read a few really good books. I think I mentioned earlier that I finished Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, which I really enjoyed. She makes such interesting choices when it comes to her form. Her prose has absolutely barely any punctuation, like no speech marks or anything. Everything is very sort of one tone, and you kind of have to fill in a lot of the gaps in that way. And because it kind of flips between two sort of parallel storylines, one following one brother and then another brother, again sort of similar I suppose to Private Rights, but I was talking about last month, like how do you make sure that people know who's speaking through the narrative style, but then also in this case and in the case of Private Rights, the characters are siblings, and so you also want there to be a kind of common related thread that tells you that as well. I think, like I said, some of the characters felt a little bit heavy-handed, particularly the character of Ivan. I felt was a bit annoyingly stereotypical, and I just didn't feel like it needed to be so heavy-handed. I keep saying that, but that's just kind of how it felt. I was drawn a lot more to Peter, even though his decision-making felt extremely chaotic and erratic and like kind of anxiety-inducing, but that friction is always going to be there with Sally Rooney. She's always going to make you feel kind of on edge about the decisions that characters are making and things like that, so that was just part of it. I really loved how she wrote the relationship between the brothers, how kind of unreliable both of them were in terms of their point of view of their relationship. As you went on, slowly the puzzle pieces sort of started becoming a bit more clear, and you realised that you actually couldn't really trust each of their perspectives wholeheartedly. Like, you had to kind of be on a bit of a journey throughout the book to figure out what exactly is behind all of this conflict between them. I thought the exploration of Peter's like relationship with the two women, with Sylvia and Naomi, really interesting. I really enjoyed that like exploration of kind of non-conventional relationship, ethical non-monogamy or just non-monogamy. Also the exploration of sort of being in love with and caring for somebody who's ill. I did feel like it was a faithful portrayal of illness. It's not kind of specific what she's got or what has happened, except for that she's had an accident and now she is disabled basically, but you don't really know how specifically, or you see a little bit sometimes of how it affects her and the kind of help that she needs. But in terms of the emotions sort of surrounding that dynamic of like guilt and shame and sort of protective coping mechanisms, naivety, hope and disappointment, and just like, I guess I felt like I could relate a little bit to that storyline because me and my partner, like, we met when we were quite young. We were 16. We've been together that whole time, and I've become disabled in that time. I've become ill in that time. Although mine didn't happen overnight, obviously it's maybe different, but sort of exploring that alternative narrative of not staying but still keeping them in your life but not wanting to be fully dependent on them in a way of a relationship was just really interesting. And I think said a lot about the characters in the first place. The fact that Peter would have stayed, but Sylvia pushed him to go, but wanted to keep him in her life enough. Seeing that being explored, I thought was really interesting. There's a lot of commotion on my road at the moment. I really liked that Sylvia had kind of a bit of an edge to her in their arguments, that she wasn't like, feel often disabled or sick characters, they are made to be sort of a perfect, angelic, can do no wrong character in order to sort of be lovable or palatable on the page, and I liked that she wasn't. She also had lots of complicated things, and just because she's sick doesn't mean she's always right and knows the right thing to do, and I really liked that. I loved how it explored grief and the complexities of that, and how two people who both were the son of somebody who died experienced grief so differently. I did really like it, and I did cry at the end. So I don't know how I felt about it, but there was a lot to say apparently. I also read The Wedding People by Alison Espach, which I didn't bloody realise this was basically a romance. I kind of went into it thinking that it was gonna be something that was like a little bit darker, a bit more sinister, maybe like a literary thriller type vibe. I don't know, something a bit like The Unwilding, or a bit like, If any of you have read Piglet by Lottie Hazel, I don't know why I thought that, I just did, where it follows a kind of woman on the edge narrative but has a bit of a sinister, dark edge to it that's not necessarily explicit. It's not like an actual thriller where loads happens, but just like, something's not quite right here. That's what I thought this was going to be. It is pretty much a straight up literary romance, which was great, but not what I was expecting. So that, I think, is my fault, and I think that's why this didn't hit the way that I was expecting it to. I really liked the writing. I thought the concept of it is really funny. I just think a wedding is a really fun setting for a novel because there are so many people coming together who wouldn't usually meet, and so many clashes and like opportunities for exploring different dynamics. So I was intrigued by that and enjoyed that. I felt a little bit like the main character lacked some kind of nuance. She felt a little bit two-dimensional. The plot felt a little loose at times, but I think, again, maybe my expectation of it was just different, and so that doomed me a little bit. I did enjoy it, and I'm glad I read it, and I would recommend it as like a really fun beach read. Oh my gosh. Then I also read Hunchback. I don't know how you pronounce it, Saon, San Ichikawa, which since reading it has been announced as a long list for the International Booker, which is really exciting. It's translated from Japanese by Polly Barton. I really love Japanese translated fiction. I think it's so, I don't know, obviously I can't speak Japanese, so I can't really speak to what the original language is like, but something about how it translates to English, quite simple, calm, like straightforward language, and I really enjoy that. It just tickles me. Depending on what the books are, sometimes Japanese fiction can be quite like sweet and soft, but if it's remotely anything not like that, then it is likely to be quite graphic and sexual, but in quite a like matter-of-fact, stark way, which reads really interestingly. It is a really fascinating exploration of disability and sexuality, and thinking about bodily autonomy as a disabled person and what that looks like, and the choices that we can and can't make as people who don't have full control over their body all the time. If you have a very medicalized body, or just not a body that can do everything, like what does it look like to be fully autonomous in that? It had some really interesting kind of commentary and observations on attitudes towards disability in Japan, kind of how it comes across in the book, and from kind of what I know, it feels like disabled people are kind of pushed into a bit of a corner and hidden away, and maybe are very well looked after but not a part of society the way that everyone else is. Same with kind of elderly people, we just sort of keep them hidden, and I think that is the case to a degree everywhere, but I feels like through this book Japanese culture really sort of encourages that. But the main character has received a lot of money from their parents to kind of keep that type of care going, so it's partly that she's in an incredibly privileged position to be so well looked after and to not have ever worry about who will care for them, but then also to not ever really be able to fully participate in society is really interesting. I really enjoyed it. It was very short, but really packed a punch, and I think it probably won't be to everyone's taste because it's just very frank around like sex, and there's a lot of like body stuff, but I think, as always, it's really interesting to see these types of stories about disabled people because we just don't see them written about in this light, particularly in fiction. So, and then finally the other day I finished What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu, which is a non-fiction memoir. I did it on a mix of Kindle and audio, which I would really recommend it on audio actually, because she narrates it herself, and she works in like media production and I think in radio, and she has a really good voice for narration, and also the audio includes actual recordings of therapy sessions with her trauma therapist, which is also really interesting and really adds something because you hear it like word for word what they talk about. It is a memoir about complex PTSD, kind of surviving first-hand trauma, but also inherited generational trauma, particularly in an Asian immigrant community, thinking about how much generational trauma sits within that community. And it really made me think of We Do Not Part by Han Kang, which I read last month and talked about in my last vlog. What do we do with that, basically, and how do the kids cope when they inherit that generational trauma, but it's not necessarily talked about. I thought it was really funny. I thought it was really honest, incredibly informative as well about what complex PTSD actually is and how it can manifest, and sort of her journey of figuring out which parts of her she can attribute to CPTSD and which parts of her are actually just normal, her personality, and that she kind of goes on a journey of figuring out that she is not only her trauma and she is not only her CPTSD. There is like more to her, but that informs so much of it, and her kind of trying to figure that out and come to terms with that, make peace with it, feel like she can trust herself. It's a really beautiful journey that she goes on. Right, I've been chatting for way too long, but I think I did have other things on my list. Aside from reading books, what I have also been reading is Substack. I don't know where I've been for the last few years while everyone's been on Substack, but I'm here now and I'm absolutely loving it. It has become such a little routine of mine. Open Substack in the morning and scroll through. Like, my feed is very well curated. Even I like the kinds of people that it throws to me, even though I'm not following them and stuff like that. So it's like my version of the news, except the news is people talking about food, their gardens, nature, journaling, notebooks, reading, interior design. It's kind of just like an absolute haven for people like me. It's just wonderful, and I love the creators that I'm discovering on there that I have not really been following on like Instagram and YouTube. I'm just like collecting loads of lovely little bits on there and I'm really enjoying it. But I'm going to end the vlog here. Thank you for being here as always. I really, really, really hope that March is good to you, and I'll see you soon. Mwah.